We have, families that just cannot or feel they cannot leave a space because they have no place to go. It puts their kids at risk.
Tonight, a plan to end gender-based violence.
Today is a pivotal moment in the relationship between First Nations and the RCMP.
Mending the relationship between RCMP and Indigenous people in Manitoba.
I see the sign every day, and it's a constant reminder of my ancestors and the struggles that they had back then.
And more consultation is needed after a potential new street name in Nova Scotia still seems problematic. Good evening, I'm Savannah Kelly. Welcome to APTN National News. The federal government is going ahead with implementing a national action plan to end gender-based violence. It announced over $18 million in funding over the next 4 years. The announcement came at the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Centre in Halifax. Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Women and Gender Equity and Youth, Lisa Hefner, and Jill Balser, Nova Scotia's Minister for the Advisory Council on the Status of Women, launched a 10-year plan. It will focus on prevention and better response efforts. Halifax's Friendship Centre will receive over $700,000 over the next 2 years. Centre Executive Director Pamela Glode-DeRoche says solving gender-based violence is complex.
We have, families that just cannot or feel they cannot leave a space because they have no place to go. It puts their kids at risk. So how are we going to help address those pieces? How do we pull all the different levels from housing and homelessness to on the ground from our Jordan's Principle program? Like, how is it all going to work?
A step forward in Manitoba today to address the strained relationship between the RCMP and Indigenous peoples, while also trying to address the high rate of violence against Indigenous women. Indigenous leadership and the Manitoba RCMP announced on Thursday the creation of a joint action circle to speak to the violence against Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ peoples. The Manitoba RCMP says it has looked at 10 components that it could address in the MMIWG National Inquiry's 231 calls for justice. The Indigenous-led survivor-centric Joint Action Circle will develop an action plan to do something about the high rates of violence against Indigenous women in the province. In the last 3 years, RCMP say Indigenous women make up 21% of all homicides in its jurisdiction. The circle will be holding its first meeting in February.
Today is a pivotal moment in the relationship between First Nations and the RCMP. A relationship that has been long and at times strained for our people and for our First Nations. We anticipate the opportunity to work towards a common goal of improving relations for a more equitable, mutual, respectful, and trusting relationship between the RCMP and First Nations in Manitoba.
An Indigenous-led nonprofit organization is almost ready after 2 years of renovating an old hotel in Edmonton to provide 54 units to unhoused people. APTN's Chris Stewart spoke to Niganan Housing Ventures about how they are helping people find a safe place to stay.
Niganan Housing Ventures opened their first supportive living home, named Ambrose Place, in 2014. Its 42 units have been helping people get off the streets and improve their lives since. Now, their fourth such home is about to fully open. The former Sands Hotel, now called Pimwestwin, meaning life in Neo-Wet'suwin, offers 34 cubicles inside the former tavern at the hotel for an emergency shelter. Another 53 self-contained apartments that can accommodate 90 people will soon be ready. Carrie Cardinal-Schulte is the CEO of Niganan Housing Ventures.
People who haven't been successfully housed or who have been on the street or in encampments or haven't had a family that they can rely on, when they end up at Niganan Houses, we provide them with this care and support, and we meet them where they're at. And what that means is that they are coming home. We look at them as coming home, and Niganan is literally translated into home.
And it's more than just a roof over their heads.
People that come to stay with us, they get 3 meals a day, they get access to cultural supports, they get housing supports, they get healthcare supports, and we provide them with as much care and support as necessary by meeting them where they're at in order to ensure that they stay successfully housed for as long as possible.
Greg Gladue has been staying at Peenemwistowin since summer. He says Niganan got him off the streets.
For sure, they're more personal. They take care of you. If you're sick, they take care of you. They're there right on the spot. I don't do hard drugs myself, but I've seen them save a lot of lives here. So.
49 beds from modular homes have been set out outside the parking lot. Cardinal Schulte says the organization consulted with neighbors about the modular homes. She says they have a good history in the areas they are in.
We've been good neighbors with all of our properties. We have a property in Macaulay, in Belvedere, and in Wellington, in Elmwood Park. And we're always been known in all of our neighborhoods that we are good neighbors. We believe in, sharing with the community, providing them with as much information as possible. And, we're looking forward to working with Elmwood Park.
Good news, as warmer than normal weather likely will not last all winter. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
We want to hear what you think about this or any other story you've seen here tonight. Here's how to continue the conversation. If you have a story you want to share, send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, go to aptnnews.ca. You can also find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X, previously known as Twitter. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. A misstep in renaming a street has led a small town on the south shore of Nova Scotia to build a relationship with the Mi'kmaq Nation. As Angel Moore reports, it begins with consultation.
Very disappointed from one colonial name to another colonial name.
That's Stephen Labrador talking about the street name change from Cornwallis to Queen. Labrador is from Wasahoba, Mi'kmaq for the Acadia First Nation, and lives in Lunenburg, a few houses from Cornwallis Street.
I see the sign every day, and it's a constant reminder of my ancestors and the struggles that they had back then.
After the Anti-Racism Committee of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia recommended renaming Cornwallis Street, the town voted to rename it Queen Street.
I think I'd like to be give somebody the credit of the doubt. I don't think there was really a malicious effort, and you have to consider that our good Queen just recently passed, and I would think, they were insincere, very likely in their...
After Queen Street was announced, Mayor Jamie Myra says he received complaints, so the name change is on hold to consult with the Mi'kmaq community.
Now, quite honestly, communication that I've personally had with the Indigenous community has been very positive. They haven't been near as negative or anti-Queen Street, for example. They're just happy we've started the reconciliation process. They're very happy we've removed Cornwallis Street.
Lewis says consultation is a part of reconciliation.
I think it's about time we make that transition, and we certainly don't need any more settler perspective. We need a true Mi'kmaq Indigenous perspective, and I think we're obligated as parents to give that to our children and grandchildren.
Lunenburg is popular with tourists, so Myra says Queen Street was the likely choice.
Now, in fairness, it was right around the time of Queen Elizabeth's passing, and Queen Elizabeth was a very well-respected and the longest living, queen of our time, probably and ever will be. So she was very well respected worldwide. So I could see where that all came from at that time. It was right around the same time that everybody was really honoring Queen Elizabeth.
Labrador says he has faith Mayor Myra will consult with the Mi'kmaq.
I would be very, very grateful if they changed it to a Mi'kmaq name.
A final street name will be determined after consultation with the Mi'kmaq community is complete. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Lunenburg, Nova Scotia.
A fire yesterday on Winnipeg's Main Street Strip caused extensive damage to an art gallery and several apartments on the building's second floor. The fire displaced more than a dozen tenants. They've been put up in a hotel. One of those tenants is musician Billy Joe Green, an Indigenous chart topper and a fixture in Western Canada's blues scene. Green is known for giving out blankets to the homeless in the dead of winter. He says he and his partner barely escaped with their lives, and his extensive guitar collection suffered some water damage. The Edge Gallery and Urban Art Centre have launched a fundraiser to repair damage and replace equipment. The cause of the fire is still under investigation. We need to take a short break. Coming up, our Truth in Politics panel weighs in on why the entire Indigenous Advisory Council for CN Rail resigned this week. Stay with us. Welcome back to APTN National News. There have been some highs and lows this week when it comes to reconciliation. Earlier in the week, the entire Indigenous Advisory Council for CN Rail resigned, saying CN has missed the mark on reconciliation. Meanwhile, university researchers have released an annual reconciliation barometer saying some progress has been made. For more, we're joined by our weekly Truth in Politics panel. Carrie Benjo is the editor of Eagle Feather News, and Megan Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Carrie, let's start with you. As we mentioned, the entire Indigenous Advisory Council for CN Rail resigned this week. A confidentiality agreement is preventing us from knowing too much, but CN Rail says it's committed to its journey toward reconciliation. What are your thoughts on this?
I think what happened is
there is a lack of acceptance of truth. With reconciliation, there comes truth. And although there's talk about wanting to reconcile, I think it's really difficult for organizations, especially ones as old as the rail line, to recognize their impact and their history, because it's a very difficult history to accept, and for reconciliation, they need to accept the truth.
And Nigan, your father sat on that council and was also the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that in its final report found the railway was an important aspect of the colonization of the Northwest. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you just have to look outside, really just the window of my house, to see the evidence of colonialism, the evidence of the Indian Act, the evidence of Sir John A. Macdonald, that it's all embodied within the train line. It's a tricky spot for me to be in because, of course, I've been hearing about some of these concerns for a while, and certain things that my father has tried to address in the organization. The fact is that, I think colonialism's got to colonialize. The fact is that, an organization that's built on the notions of colonialism may not be favorable or interested in wanting to decolonize their organization. And that means taking concrete actions, because I think when this advisory group was founded, CN Rail was very happy. They were very happy that people like Roberta Jameson were coming on board to be able to show up and be on websites and et cetera, et cetera. But when it came to the actual delivery of work, that means you have to do your business differently, because the fact is that train lines go by First Nations, go through First Nations, have deep relationships with Red River Métis. The reality is that CN Rail has one of the biggest legal obligations in this country to create healthy and positive relationships with Indigenous peoples. They owe reparations to Indigenous communities for the things that have been done in the past and continue to be done today. And they owe First Nations and Métis communities to do a better job in the future, especially in the delivery of things like goods or resources or jobs. And if you're not willing to take those actions, then I could certainly see why this committee would not want to continue to have a relationship.
And Carrie, the so-called reconciliation barometer was released on Wednesday. This is a report that tracks public perceptions about progresses towards reconciliation. There was a major increase in awareness of past harms of residential schools in the past year, but it also found that non-Indigenous people are not yet taking the next steps in reconciliation, like getting to know Indigenous communities in their area or taking in Indigenous cultural events. What are your thoughts on where we are?
I've always had the position that reconciliation needs to come from the individual. I believe that true reconciliation happens with people. We can have government-funded programs and initiatives. That's not going to create true reconciliation. What we need are individuals to do the work, to understand the history and do better. I'm not surprised that at the findings, I think what we're seeing now is a lot of people that have talked, who like to wear their orange t-shirts on those special days, and and do all the optics of it. But when it comes right down to the actual work of, reaching out, getting to know Indigenous people, it's a little harder. It's a little scarier. And so they pull back and they're not taking that next step. There seems to be a sort of a barrier, an invisible barrier that still exists. And I think until we as individuals work to bridge that gap, we're not going to see this truth and reconciliation that we would like to see. I am hopeful. I see a lot of young children in the schools and stuff, and they're so much more aware about our history,
than I ever was. I'm a residential school survivor. I didn't even know about our history. I learned about the history everybody else does. But now to see all these young children, my grandson is grade 2 and he knows about Indian residential schools. I didn't even know about them when I was his age. And I think the future is looking brighter, but right now I think as individuals, we need to take that extra step to reach out, to embrace, and also, just take that leap of faith.
And final question to Nigan. The TRC final report was released 8 years ago tomorrow. How are you feeling about where we're at?
One of the problems with doing these reports is they take such a big view that you forget that reconciliation was never supposed to look as a sort of goal. It's like reconciliation is about moments and it's about locations. It's about spaces. And so therefore we need to look smaller, not bigger. It's useful for these kinds of reports, but I think ultimately what these reports do is say, are people attending cultural events? I don't think cultural events cure racism. I think what cures racism is anti-racism work that is being done at the grassroots in the front lines. I'm more interested in how are people understanding about stolen land than are they attending a powwow. And I think that reconciliation will be embodied in that process. But I still, at the same time, I appreciate that this report is important. The TRC calls are designed to do is to give concrete actions in everyday life, in workplaces, in the private and the public sphere. And so I see a lot of work being done, particularly in certain corners of the country. I see education calls being done, enacted almost daily. So call to action 63. I also see that we have 58, which has been done. For the most part, the Pope came to Canada and apologized. But if the Yellowhead Institute is correct, I mean, the movement is very, very slow. It's like an aircraft carrier can only move a couple inches every little bit once in a while, and it's very difficult to be able to do that. So my hope is that reconciliation, as people become more awareness, which is really what this report's all about, that people will be more amped and be more available to the idea of change, and that we get less residential school deniers, less people who are trying to create racism in workplaces or problems for the rest of us to deal with. That's my hope.
Absolutely. Well, Nigan, Carrie, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you both so much for sharing your perspectives today.
Yeah, miigwech.
Thanks. We need to step aside for one more quick break. Still to come, a look at what's coming up tonight on Nation to Nation. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Clarence Jones sent in a great shot of an eagle chilling on a tree branch as it surveys the land within the Gitxsan Nation. Always appreciate your photos, Clarence. Thank you for sharing that. If you have a photo you would like to share, send that photo to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting off on the east coast, sunshine and 6 degrees in Halifax, snowy and 2 degrees in St. John's. Nain, -2, Kuujjuaq, flurries and -10. Val-d'Or, snowy there, 4 degrees, +3 in Saguenay. Sarnia, sunshine, 10 degrees, North Bay, +7. Timmins, 3 degrees there, snowy and -1 in Big Trout Lake. Sunshine and -5 in God's Lake, -15 in Churchill. 0 degrees in Gimli, +1 in Dauphin. 2 degrees in Swift Current, snowy and +2 in North Battleford. 1 degree in Stony Rapids, 0 degrees in sunshine in Buffalo Narrows. To northern Alberta, +1 in High Level and +2 in sunshine in Fort Chip. Sunshine and 0 degrees in Edmonton, -1 in Medicine Hat. 3 degrees in Penticton, snowy and +1 in Bella Coola. Prince George, snowy, -1, Prince Rupert, rainy and +7. Watson Lake, snowy there, -1, Beaver Creek, sunshine and -25. Wrigley, snowy, -20, Trout Lake, -9. Colville Lake, snowy and -24, Sax Harbor, -14. Now Yet, sunshine, -31, Cambridge Bay, -25. Resolute, snowy, -27, and Iqaluit, -23. It's now time for Nation to Nation host Annette Francis to drop by and tell us what's coming up.
Coming up after the news on Nation to Nation, we'll talk to an Anishinaabe woman from Indigenous Climate Action. She attended COP28 and was part of a panel of Indigenous peoples from around the world. She'll talk about a new report released this week called Decolonizing Climate Policy in Canada. As well, staff from Aboriginal Legal Services in Toronto has produced a debut single. It highlights the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. It's part of a music therapy program. That's coming up in just a few minutes.
Thanks, Annette. Stay tuned for Nation to Nation with Annette Francis coming up right now following tonight's newscast. That's all the time we have for you tonight on APTN National News. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Savannah Kelly, and from all of us here at APTN News, Marcy Miigwech, thank you for joining us. Have a great night.